Today's topic is civil rights, and there's not a more significant public official in Alabama's history, in my opinion, and lots of others, who had more to do with seeking justice in one of the most horrific civil rights crimes in our state's history. And it's a fascinating story, and I look forward to Bill telling you it's a great combination of great legal work, great political maneuvering, great police work, the whole great partnership with other agencies and other experts. It's an incredible story that took place right here in our state. So we're very fortunate to have Bill here. He's one of the public officials and just lawyers and people that I respect the most, and for him to come down here and take his time. Bill's a graduate of this law school, had an interesting experience when he was in law school, and as an undergrad, he was here at a very momentous historic time, which he'll tell us about. So he's an Alabama person. He was elected as the district attorney in Dothan, Alabama. How old were you, Bill?
25.
25 years old. So that's hardly out of law school. And then 3 years later was elected Attorney General of the state of Alabama at the age of 28, the youngest elected Attorney General in the country by a mile at that time, and I'm not sure if that record's ever been matched. You may know, Bill, but I'd be surprised.
Bill Clinton was younger.
Bill Clinton was younger. Okay. Well, there's a couple of historic figures. Well, you have our class here, Bill. It's a seminar class of really bright students, upperclassmen, and they've learned a lot about the law here at this fabulous law school, but this is an opportunity for them to learn about not only the law and how it's applied, but in real life, given challenges, how you succeed, how you achieve a great accomplishment. And so I want you to get into that. We're going to go straight through. We normally take a break, but we're starting a little late. We'll probably let you out a little early, but I want it to be a coherent story, and it's uninterrupted because it is so fascinating. Bill, let me just start out by getting you to tell the class a little bit about your experience here at the university as an undergrad and in the law school.
Well, some of it wouldn't do to tell, you know. But I had a good time for a lot of years, and did enough studying to graduate. And back then, thank goodness, I was the first group that had to take the bar exam before my class. If you finished at Alabama, you were exempt from taking the bar exam. And so then Cumberland moved from Tennessee to Samford, and they've become a very good law school, and were a good law school even then, but it didn't sit very well with them that students that finished here didn't have to take the bar, but they had to. And so which should have been done, they started requiring everybody to take it, and I was the first group that passed, that had to take it, that finished from the university. And so I somehow got by enough to finish Alabama and pass the bar, and clerked with the Alabama Supreme Court for a year, and it was a momentous year, my senior year in law school and my year clerking in Montgomery. In '63, it was the old law school, Farrah Hall. And Farrah Hall, if you are familiar with it, is still there. In the back of Farrah Hall is probably not 150 feet from the front door of Foster Auditorium, which at that time was the basketball venue for the team, and also where students registered for class every year. And when Wallace stood in the schoolhouse door, I went to one of the classrooms on the second floor and had a great view of less than 150 feet away from that whole charade of Wallace standing in the door and the U.S. Attorney Macon Weaver from the Northern District and Nicholas Katzenbach, the Deputy Attorney General, coming up with the students, Jimmy Hood and Vivian Malone. And the Wallace, of course, blocked the entrance until President Kennedy federalized the guard, and Wallace stood aside. I think they say that later was all orchestrated or coordinated, planned, but I thought it was disgraceful, and I think most of my fellow students did. Very few supported it. I reckon most would be in the category of not caring one way or the other, just wanting to go on with their work, and that didn't like the interruption of the spectacle. But 63, besides the stand in the schoolhouse door, was a very momentous, if not momentous, not the most momentous, I think the most certainly tumultuous year in the entire civil rights struggle. Early that year, Medgar Evers was assassinated over in Mississippi, outside when he got home, out walking in his door under his carport. A little later on, the postman by the name of Moore, that was probably mentally challenged in some ways, but he was going to walk from, I think, Chattanooga to Jackson, Mississippi, down Highway 11 through Alabama, through Tuscaloosa to Jackson, and give Governor Ross Barnett a letter that he was carrying. He was the postman. He was going to deliver a letter that would call on him to obey the law of the land, and he was going to come right through Alabama. He walked from Chattanooga down, and when he got just inside of Alabama, he was shot by and killed. But he was wearing a sandwich board that had pro-integration writings on it, and it's never been fully known who the person's never been brought to trial that killed him. But that happened early on. Then you had the schoolhouse door stand, and later you had the March on Washington, the Dr. King I Have a Dream speech. Then September 15th was the most, to me, horrific day of all the bad days that occurred and violent days during the Civil Rights Movement, and that's when the bomb went off at the 16th Street Baptist Church, and the 4 little children were killed, 4 little girls. One of them was age 11, the other 3 were 14. And as I say, I had a front row seat to the stand in the schoolhouse door when the bomb went off, which was only 3 months later. I was over at my fraternity house getting ready to eat Sunday dinner, and I imagine watch football, pro football, like which what we did on Sundays, and it came over the news that there had been an explosion in Birmingham in the church, and pretty soon, I mean, there had been some injuries, and then it came that there had been some deaths, and I was glued to the TV set and lost my appetite. It came over that there'd been 4 little children killed, and so at night I still had no appetite, but it affected me pretty substantially, and I made a little vow to myself that I wanted to do something about that case. And now you got to realize what I envisioned being able to do was that maybe the feds would make a case, the Justice Department, and that I envisioned going and volunteering, seeing Macon Weaver, the U.S. Attorney, and offering to help in any way I could to run errands, and by that I meant carry law books. If they wanted me to do any writing or anything, I would, but mostly bring hamburgers, hot dogs, cigarettes, Cokes, whatever the investigators and the people wanted. That's what I envisioned doing, and I thought if I needed to drop out a semester of law school, I'd do it. But that was what I envisioned being able to do. But lo and behold, a little over 6 years after that, I was elected Attorney General of Alabama, and I was the youngest. Clinton didn't come along till a few years after that. I had the record for a few years, but the night before I got sworn in, well, I beat an incumbent. The only 2 people I think that have ever defeated an incumbent Attorney General in Alabama are Luther and I. We both defeated incumbent AGs, and so I don't know how about yours, but mine didn't take it gracefully. I had to run against him again in November. He formed a third party. None of them were Republicans back then, Luther, but he started a third party, and I had to run against him in May in the primary, and then again in November. But we didn't take office till the middle of January, and we didn't have access to the office, so it was not an orderly transition. But the night before, or the day before, the Sunday before we were all sworn in, the authorities handling the inauguration presented me with things like, well, a badge and a certificate of election and a certificate showing I was Attorney General, keys to all the state cars that were assigned to the Attorney General's office, keys to the office, which we'd not been able to use up to then, and quite a few other things having to do with taking over the office. And but one of the things, this was before we had 800 numbers or 888 numbers on telephone, and so they had a system where for every major city in Alabama, like they had a local phone number for that city, and they had a number, for instance, for Birmingham or Mobile or Tuscaloosa or Dothan or Anniston or wherever, Florence, and you would dial, if you were in that city, you could dial that number, and it would, one of the ladies at the switchboard, we had a big switchboard in Montgomery that the ladies would work, and they'd plug in who you'd call, and they would answer. And so you'd say, ring, if you were in Mobile, you could call that Mobile number, and one of the ladies would answer in Montgomery and say, you could say, ring Attorney General's office, ring the governor's office, whatever. Or you could tell them, how about dialing a number in Huntsville for me? And so she would hook you up. And so I knew that I would be using that card pretty nearly every week. So I sat down and I remembered well, I never forgot, the vow that I had made about doing something. And I said, this turned out to be you're going to maybe have the only chance that anybody in the world will ever have, instead of just running errands and toting law books for people. You might be the only person that can do something about that case. It never had been solved. Later I we'll get into all that, but so I took that card that I knew I'd be using, and I wrote one of the little girls' names in each corner of the card, where that every time I used that card, I'd see those names, and I'd know that that was one thing I wanted to be sure I was able to do. And the Attorney General of Alabama, as Luther and I were fortunate to be, I'm realistically sure still the case, it was when I was there, has more organic power, legal power, than any other state attorney general. The Attorney General of Alabama can take over any criminal case or bring any case in any county, can move a DA or work with a DA, or bring another DA in, or bring a retired DA in, or send somebody in his office or in. In other words, you've got statewide jurisdiction where you can do anything in any criminal case at any time. And other powers, some state AGs are very limited. Tennessee, all they do in Tennessee, the Attorney General is elected by the Supreme Court, and all they do is really what the Solicitor General does, is argue the appellate cases. The Attorney General of Pennsylvania is appointed. The Attorney General of New Jersey is appointed. But Alabama has power through the years that is there to be used if you care to use it.
Well, sometimes, Bill, as we've talked about in class, the governor thinks that the Attorney General is his or her lawyer, which of course is not the case, but you should mention who was elected governor the same time you were elected the youngest Attorney General.
The same election that I won was probably the most racist campaign ever, and that's saying something in Alabama. But George Wallace beat Albert Brewer in the runoff with a very racist campaign, so I got elected Attorney General the same election that George Wallace got elected governor again. And I was never a Brewer fan either. And it turned out I later ran against Brewer for governor, but that's not pertinent. But Brewer stood in the schoolhouse door with Wallace, and a lot of people are not aware of that. In fact, Brewer was the Speaker of the House, and George Wallace, when he stood in the schoolhouse door, demanded that the Lieutenant Governor, Jim Allen, and the Speaker of the House, Albert Brewer, come stand with him. And Jim Allen, to his great credit, he later became U.S. Senator, refused to do it. And that's not well known, but Brewer came and did it, so that's why one of the reasons I was never a Brewer fan. I served 8 years as Attorney General while Wallace was governor, and then 4 years later I came back and got elected Lieutenant Governor, and George Wallace was serving his last term, so all 12 years I served in state office, George Wallace was the governor. And I'm going to tell some stories when it comes time about working with Governor Wallace, and but he was the governor concurrently the whole time I was in state office.
I wonder if he knew you were looking out the law school window when he was standing in the schoolhouse door. Did you ever tell him that?
I don't think I did.
Well, you should talk a little bit about the office you put together, George Beck, players that will be important in your story, pulling together Myron Thompson. people that, some groundbreaking appointments that you made as you started to build the team to get to the case that we're talking about?
Well, since the election was in, the Democratic primary was in May, and we didn't take over till January, we had, unlike today, you got a full 8 months or so, 7 or 8 months to where you can be getting ready and assembling a team, because you just never hardly had opposition in November. Of course, I did with Gallion, but it was a third party by then. That was a joke. It was ordained after you won the Democratic primary, you were going to be the office holder. So I had time to try to put together a good team, and but this is historical, and I was nervous about. You mentioned the fact that you had to defend the state, and there is an obligation for the Attorney General to do certain things, and so I was a little nervous, but I was about serving under Wallace because of the campaign he had run against Brewer. And I knew that I was not going to be a party to any of these. There's a story about that I'll tell in a minute too. But so I knew I needed to get some kind of legitimate argument where I could say that I might not go along with something the governor would be wanting me to do. And we had, at that time, a milk control board that set prices for milk at every level. And they even told grocery store owners, mom and pop shops and the big chains, Bruno's, Winn-Dixie, they told them what they had to charge for their milk at retail. And I thought that was unconstitutional. I thought it was unpopular. And there was a case, just luckily for me, we had a chain of grocery stores based, the headquarters was in Mobile called Del Champs. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Del Champs stores that used to be. And Del Champs had filed a suit that was pending to declare the Milk Control Act unconstitutional. And the state, of course, was defending to uphold the act. And I felt like it was unconstitutional as well, but it also, I felt like that was an issue that was popular with the public. The Del Champs wanted to use milk as a loss leader and, sell it for, have sales on it for a dime, a quart or something like that, and not be told what they had to charge. And so I decided that what I would do, I said, first of all, my heart was in it. I agreed with the Del Champs position. I did not agree with the state's position. And I did not want to come in and have the first thing that I did was refuse to help the governor in a segregation suit. And I thought, I'll try to find an issue that's a little different from that one to make my own stand. And so the Del Champs case played into my hands, kind of. And so I filed I took office in January, and within weeks, days almost, I filed a petition in federal court to be allowed to switch sides, so to speak, and not represent the state to uphold the validity of that act, but instead to join the plaintiffs and attack the act. And so they appointed a 3-judge federal panel, and there were 3 great judges. Judge Richard Reeves with the 5th Circuit at the time, later became 11th Circuit, of course. Judge Frank Johnson, that all of you should be very familiar with, and Judge Virgil Pittman, who had been a state judge in Etowah County and was also by then on the federal bench. And so the 3-judge panel took up the issue, and it's a very short opinion. Are we passing it out?
Pass it out, yeah.
Okay.
2-page opinion.
It won't hurt if we take a little break maybe and let you guys read this this opinion.
Yeah, let's take a couple of minutes just to read it really quickly,
Yeah.
because it's a really, I was not aware myself of this opinion until you presented it to class last year. It's really pretty fantastic.
But I will say, if we had had the choice of any 3 federal judges in the country, we couldn't have picked a better panel than the 3 we drew by.
Well, this is an important principle that we talked about in class, Bill. The role of the AG to defend the laws of the state and certain precedents, and when do you change your position, when do you evaluate it as something that's defensible, or it's always an issue that AGs have to confront from time to time when they are in this position. Everybody have a chance to skim it? Good.
Okay. Well, I might, of course, this is pretty clear cut what it says. In other words, Attorney General, if he thinks the state's doing something unconstitutional, he doesn't have to defend it. And so I had, when we got that, look at the date on there, and that's the key, February, which is, I'm in office maybe not quite a month yet. And so we did it in something that nobody could complain about. And so I was worried. Why I wanted it established was what Wallace might do in the segregation field down the line, and I wanted to have a precedent where I wouldn't have to feel like defend a position that I felt like was wrong. And so I will add one other thing. This is non-legal, but I was so nervous about being sworn in on the same day as Governor Wallace. I was afraid of what he was going to say in his inaugural address, because 8 years before he had said, draw the line in the sand, segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. And I didn't want to be sitting up there on that platform with him saying that. And so I decided I was not going to be sworn in with the other state officials. And I did not attend the swearing in that morning. And I got my friend and classmate, Reggie Hamner, by then was he'd also clerked with me at the Alabama Supreme Court, and he had by then gotten to be the I reckon executive director of the state bar or something like that. And so I got Reggie to allow me to use the state bar building there on Dexter Avenue, right in front of the Capitol, to have my swearing in that afternoon after the other state officials were sworn in on the Capitol steps that morning, and then we had a reception in the state bar building. And so I was not even up there when Governor Wallace did his speech. Now, thank goodness, even though he'd run that racist campaign, he did not get off on a big tangent, so it would have actually been okay had I been sworn in, but I didn't want to run the risk. So I was taking precautions like this to be ready for where I would not have to, take a position that I felt like was wrong. And so I'll tell, you might ask why I had such feelings, and the answer about civil rights, and the answer is, I don't know. People have asked that question many, many times, and they are always surprised to find out that there's probably very few people in Alabama that got roots any deeper in Alabama than my family on all sides do. We were all four of my great-grandfathers fought for the South. On the Baxley side, there were 5 Baxley brothers that fought, and 3 of them were killed, and the other 2, including my great-grandfather, were wounded. Some people think, well, maybe I went off to Ivy League or something and learned it up there. I not only got my education completely from the first day of the first grade through the last day of law school in the segregated schools of Alabama, except my last year here was technically not segregated because Vivian Malone and Jimmy Hood were in undergrad school. But in fact, I don't know how good at geography all you guys are, but I was an undergraduate graduate. I was in law school before I ever went further north than either Chattanooga or Memphis, whichever one of those is the furthest north. By the time I finished undergrad at Alabama, I had never been further north than one of those 2. So it'd be hard for anybody to say that I had learned where I came about these feelings anywhere but in Alabama. But the best I can explain, a lot of people think, well, there must be something like Saul on the road to Damascus when he saw a blinding light and was revealed to him, blah, 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 but that didn't happen either. From the earliest I remember, my mother had me and my brother who came along after me. Later he was president of the state bar, but she had us at the Methodist church every time the doors were open. And the earliest I remember is the Sunday school lessons, and they'd pass out pictures of Jesus with the little children all around him, red and yellow, black and white. They're precious in his sight. And when you read the Bible, and it's say, first commandment, love the Lord God, and second, love your brother as yourself. And then the parable of the Good Samaritan, who's your brother, the parable of the Good Samaritan. It was hard, even when I was a young child, for me to understand how you could, if you're going to believe in the church, it's hard for me to understand how you could read that and believe it was good to treat somebody different because of the color of their skin. And so I never know of a time that I didn't feel like, and I could see on the streets of Dothan. Now, my mom and daddy taught us to treat people with respect to everybody, and but I could see, and Dothan, compared to many, many other places in this state, was comparatively speaking, a very tolerant city, town. We had black men served on the jury. Women didn't serve on the jury until after I became a lawyer in state court. Females didn't. But black men served on juries. Black people in Houston County voted. But still, I saw that there was plenty of ways they weren't treated fairly, and I just didn't think it was right. Now, as I got on up in high school and Montgomery bus boycott started, and my daddy would, I can still hear him saying, son, I'm glad you feel like you do, but you better be careful what you're saying, expressing your opinions like that. You always do what you think's right, but you don't have to brag about it, because you can't change anything, and all you're going to do is ruin yourself. And he told me that several times. And after I got elected, the reason I wanted to be in politics was I felt like Alabama was too good of a place to be doing the things we had been doing, and I wanted to do my little part, what I could to try to change that. And but I remembered my daddy telling me, be careful, so it wasn't something I advertised. I didn't run and say, if you elect me, I'm going to do this. Now, I did say I was going to hire people, the best people I could find, regardless of, and when I got elected Attorney General, at that time, the only black people that worked for the state were cafeteria workers or janitors. Now, of course, you had blacks in the school system, which was by and large still segregated then, but there were no blacks employed by the state in any of the state offices until I came in, and I started looking for trying to hire a lawyer, and it was easier said than done because, number one, we had no black graduates from the university at that time, none from Cumberland. And so I offered a job to several, but we also had, as Luther's well aware, I think they still have this problem. You have a merit system, and you can only hire people what the merit system scale allows you to pay, and most people can get a higher wage practicing law than the state can pay them. Certainly back in those days, maybe when you were there too.
Oh, yeah.
And so I offered it to several people, several blacks that were lawyers, but they couldn't take that kind of pay cut. And so I went in January, Thanksgiving in November, I went home to Dothan, and my daddy was still alive then, and he said, son, are you still looking for trying to hire a colored person for, that was the term that good people used back in those days. And I said, yes, sir. I said, I'm still trying. And I said, I've made an offer to some, but I hadn't been able to hire one yet. And he said, well, my friend, John Henry Glanton, Mr. Glanton was well thought of in the black community in Dothan. He said his grandson is getting ready to finish law school at Yale, and he would love to have him back in Alabama. Would you be interested in talking to him? I said, sure. He said, well, let me call Mr. Glanton. So he called the grandfather of Myron Thompson. Judge Thompson was his grandfather, and Myron was from Tuskegee, but his mother was Mr. Glanton's daughter. And so my dad called Mr. Glanton. He came over, excuse me, to our house Thanksgiving afternoon, and I told him I would be delighted to talk to Myron. He said, well, he'll be coming home. I think it was maybe Christmas holidays, and so I had a interview with Myron, and didn't need an interview when I saw his background at Yale. I mean, I knew this was somebody I wanted, so I offered him a job, and he turned down much better offers and came the first black to work for the state of Alabama in any position other than janitorial or cafeteria worker, and he, in some ways, I don't know how many of you might have ever met Judge Thompson or heard of him. He's senior judge in Middle District, but brilliant guy and a wonderful judge. He, in some ways, had to be like Jackie Robinson. He had to be a cut better than everybody else, and he came through just like the champ that he is. And when it came time to when Jimmy Carter came in, I believe was when it was, and Senator Heflin had gotten elected to the Senate. I was out of office, and Myron had finished, had later left my office and gone back to Dothan and opened a practice in Dothan. And Senator Heflin had recommended Fred Gray, who was a great lawyer, one of the early civil rights lawyers, and he had recommended Fred for the first, and Judge Clemon, U.W. Clemon, and so it was Fred Gray and U.W. Clemon were put up for 2 judgeships, and there came some bad publicity on Fred, which was uncalled for and not true, but it was damaging. And so Senator Heflin called me. By then I was out of office, in between offices. I hadn't been elected lieutenant governor. I'd gotten beat for governor by Fob James in a runoff. And Senator Heflin got elected to the Senate that same election. And he called me and said, Bill said, Fred is going to have to get out of this thing. He's decided he doesn't want to put up with this this abuse. And he said, I don't blame him. But said some people have recommended Myron Thompson, said he would be a good judicial appointee nominee. And he said, I thought I'd ask you about him, and do you know anything in his background at all that would be detrimental if we submitted his name? And I said, Chief, I called Senator Heflin Chief always because he had been Chief Justice while I was Attorney General. He got elected Chief Justice the same day I got elected Attorney General, and I served with him for 6 good years where we had a good working relationship. And, I said, Chief, I said, I do not believe that from the time Myron Thompson was in diapers to today, I said, I know he's not done anything bad, but I do not believe he has ever even had a bad thought go through his brain. As I don't think anybody's going to ever find anything that he's done illegal or borderline or unconstitutional or disgraceful or anything else. He said, well, I'm glad to hear that. And so that's how Judge Thompson's name got submitted, and he has certainly served our state and our country well and still is serving as a senior judge. And it was said along those lines, since this is about civil rights, and this is not accurate by 50%. It was said that after we hired Myron, we hired quite a few other blacks, and it was said we had 50% of all the black lawyers and 50% of all the female lawyers in Alabama were working for the AG's office. Now, I said that's half true. We did not have 50% of the black lawyers. We had more black lawyers. We had quite a few in the office, but it was not more than 50% because you had quite a few black lawyers in Birmingham, Mobile and Montgomery and Tuskegee, and we never had 50% there. But I think that it was true that we had 50% of the female lawyers. I think we might have had 80% of the female lawyers. They was when I was in law school, there was one female, and she flunked out, unfortunately. Then a couple of years behind me, Anita Baines came, and she finished, but there were very, very few. I think there were more black lawyers than there were female lawyers. Janie Shores, who when she was in law school was named Janie Elsie, she was around. She hadn't gotten elected when I got to be Attorney General. She hadn't gotten elected to the Supreme Court yet, but she was the first female to serve on the Supreme Court, and I still think the brightest Supreme Court justice we've ever had in Alabama, maybe any state's ever had. Her name was Janie Elsie, and I credit her also with me being able to finish law school because she wrote these summaries of every court case, of every course she took. And they were called the Janie Elsie summaries. And when I was in law school, you could find them. And so.
Did she sell them, or did she just?
No, she didn't have nothing to do with them. She made them in public use. But I made it my business to try to find a Janie Elsie summary, and a week or so before finals started, I would get the Janie Elsie summaries, and that's how I passed law school. I had some professors that would scare me so I would have to read a little more than that. Sam Beatty primarily.
I've heard Sam Beatty stories from all over the country.
Well,
Bill, I want to segue to the case itself in the time that we have. But to bring us back to 1971 and this opinion here, I was graduating from high school in 1971. Schools in Birmingham had just desegregated in 1968, let's say. My high school was desegregated, but of course Brown versus Board was in 1954. That's quite a lag time between that historic ruling and the actual implementation of that. So it was a tumultuous time. You still had to deal, as hard as it is to believe, the Ku Klux Klan. A lot of people can hardly imagine that it could be possible that there could be an actual Klan out in the world. And I had my own little experience, and this will come into play, and this is part of Bill's case here, but I actually, as a senior in college in New Orleans, I don't think I've told you this, but I took a course on the New South. I always been very interested in history. When the 4 little girls were killed, I was 10 years old, just a year or two different from me. It hit us really hard. To even imagine that. But I was taking this course in Southern history in New Orleans at Tulane, and there was at the time a big talk show that would have people on at night and discuss controversial topics. And one night I happened to be watching it after class, and up pops David Duke. He's 23 years old. I'm like 20 years old. He's 23 years old. He's the Grand Dragon of the Klan. I thought this cannot be possible, but he was a big figure back then. I guess he's still alive, but I thought this is amazing, And it turns out he lived in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I'm in New Orleans. So I went to my professor and I said, do you think it'd be a good paper if I was able to get an interview with the Grand Dragon, with David Duke? And he said, oh, you'll never be able to get, what do you. And I said, well, if I could. And he said, well, come back to me later. So I ended up looking in the phone book, Baton Rouge phone book, found his number, called David Duke. He answers the phone. I just said, I'm a student, I'm interested in writing a story about what you're up to and for a paper on a class I'm taking. Do you mind if I come up and interview you? And I don't think the professor could believe that I had secured an interview with David Duke the Klan Grand Dragon, and he said, all right, you can do this, but don't let him give you any don't let him give you any material. He's probably being watched by the FBI. You know, I don't know what's going on, and don't be associated with him. If he gives you anything, give it to the library. You know, don't get on any mailing list or anything like that, and some practical advice. But I showed up at his door. He opens up the door, invites me into his house, and for the next hour and a half, I listened to the most vile conspiracy, racist theories that I could believe, with books from George Lincoln Rockwell, the Nazi Party, American, you know, and so I came face to face with this person who actually believed all this garbage and was infested with this horrible racist philosophy, and I could never get over thinking about how could somebody become so hateful, you know, and warped like that. And I wrote a paper up and went on my way, but I've never forgotten that encounter. And Bill, you know, that was just an academic thing that happened to me, but you came face to face with actual Klansmen who did horrible things, and I think you should tell the story of the case, how you brought them to justice.
Well, if I can comment on something that you made me think of, I hadn't thought of in a long time, about your friend David Duke. When I ran for governor the first time, the Klan was very angry because we had convicted Chambliss of the bombing the year before. And so David Duke, as you mentioned, he was head of the Klans by then. When I had my first kickoff rally, it was in Jasper, and David Duke came. Say it was on a Monday. No, it was really on a Saturday. But he came over on Friday and was on all the TV stations in Birmingham, Montgomery, and everywhere else, and said that the Klan were going to follow me to every rally. I was going to make 8 speeches a day in every town, in every county, at least in the state. And that was what I'd announced. And they said they were going to follow me and expose me at every rally. So my kickoff rally, I had my first wife with me, and she was about, I'm going to say, 8.5 months pregnant with our first child. And so David Duke had his people with their signs and calling me all kinds of names, parading back and forth. And in that election, the mine workers had endorsed me, and they were out that day. And so there was one big mine worker who had arms as big around as my thighs. And so he went up to David Duke, and David Duke had some scurrilous sign about me in his hand, nailed on, and it was nailed on almost 2x4, something like that. And so this guy snatched that thing away from David Duke, and he said, there were a lot of people standing around. He said, and so he took the thing, it was a big thing, and he broke it, and just broke it in 2. And he handed it back to him and said, if we see you at another Baxley rally, I'm going to do the same thing to your spine. And David Duke never showed up at another rally. And several years after that, that guy called me, and he was very upset. He said his son had gotten in some kind of trouble, and he wanted to know if I could maybe represent him, and he was apologetic, said, I don't have much money, but I can pay. And I said, there won't be any charge. I said, you paid that fee a long time ago with David Duke. And I don't think David Duke has changed. I think he's still at it.
Well, the sad thing was he spent, most of the time talking about anti-Semitic. He was anti-Semitic. He mainly spent the whole time talking about the Jews and all these crazy conspiracy theories, I was just amazed, you know. Sadly, he probably is still around here somewhere.
I think he's still down in Louisiana. I don't think he ever came back to Alabama after that
Good, that was a
mine
good-
worker thing.
That was a
did,
great service you provided. All
I-
right, well, let's get to the case, though. How did you? It's
Okay.
so fascinating how you came to you,
All
and
right.
how you navigated it.
Well, you made me think of another thing. Every time I get around Luther, he says things that remind me of things I hadn't thought about in decades. But when I got sworn in, at that time, I mentioned we beat incumbents. The state was already involved, and they had several pending lawsuits where they were the plaintiff, and a couple of them they'd gotten the state of Mississippi and the Mississippi Attorney General and the state of Louisiana to join them. And so there were some of those pending, and then there were cases against us where the Attorney General was defending, trying to uphold segregation laws and stop integration of jury pools and voting lists and things like that. So right about this same time, I also had my chief assistant, Walter Turner, who was my classmate, and he was Judge Johnson's law clerk. And when I was a law clerk for the Supreme Court, we were roommates in Montgomery. And so I had him make me a list of all the cases that we had pending, and the state was either the plaintiff or the defendant that were upholding segregation. And so I knew I had, I had to get this done first. But so as soon as this was done, I made the list of the cases, and I called, and we weren't giving up anything, but I decided we were going to drop them all, or change sides, or one or the other, or change that and agree that they were right. And so I called, it looks like, I think every one of them, there were some in some other states, but every one of them in Alabama was in Judge Frank Johnson's court in Montgomery in Middle District, and so we weren't giving up anything because we were going to lose every one of them anyway. It was just the Attorney General was trying to play politics, appealing to the bad side of that. So anyway, I called Judge Johnson's secretary and said that I would like for him to set a status conference, and I listed the cases, and she said, all right. So Judge Johnson set it up, and a couple of days off, several days. And so the day before he set them all, I thought, I owe it to Governor Wallace. He's the governor, and I'm the Attorney General, and I'm not going to go ask his permission, but I owe it to him to tell him what I'm getting ready to do, and so he won't be blindsided, and we won't run it on the news. So I said, I'm going to go tell the governor that I'm getting ready to do this tomorrow, and that we're going to dismiss these cases, and they're not going to be any more of them, and that we're going to switch positions when we're wrong, because by then this would have been just hot off the press. And so I was dreading having to go see him. I mean, he had run that vicious campaign against Brewer, and I was dreading it, but I felt like I owed it to him. And I had always gotten along, liked him as a person. So I got the appointment to go see him, went right by myself, but I got a folder with all the law showing the Attorney General was in control of the litigation. And so I went over, and he said, Bill, what can I do for you? I said, well, Governor, I feel like I owed it to tell you something we're going to do. I said, no, the Attorney General is in control of litigation and not the governor. The position the state takes is ex rel Attorney General, not ex-real governor, and I told him what I was going to do. And so I sat back and thought, oh gosh, here it comes. He and Richmond Flowers had gotten into, I mean, it ruined Richmond's political life, but Richmond had some other things he did that didn't help him. But so I sat back and I had been sweating bullets, and I was waiting for Governor Wallace to jump on me. And after I told him what I was going to do, I told him, I said, Governor, I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you, this is what I'm going to do tomorrow. And so he said, well, Bill, I thought, he said, I'm not going to try to tell you how to run your office, and I don't expect you to tell me how to run mine. Now, let's talk about so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. He never brought it up again except 2 or 3 times after that when I ran into him on other matters or went to see him on other matters. He said, when you dropped those cases, did you ever get any bad mail? And I said, no, never did. And then later, when I hired Myron, I didn't ask him about that or tell him ahead of time about that. I just did it. And the only thing he ever said, that Myron was the first, you know. And then shortly after, we hired others, and I hired a secretary, too. First secretary, black. But the only thing Wallace ever said to me was, he said, when you hired that young colored man, did you get any bad letters about that? And I said, yeah, I got 2. He said, is that all you got? And I said, yeah. I said, I got, I think, 35 good letters saying I did the right thing. He says, you did? And he saw me a couple of times after that and said, did you get any more bad letters or any bad letters? I said, no. I said, from time to time I get a good one, but I hadn't gotten any more bad ones. But that's the only thing he ever said in 8 years. And we never had a dispute about it. He still, I mean, he would be on me, wanting me to be for him for president, and I was the only state official that never endorsed him for president. But he and I couldn't have gotten along better on a personal basis. And
That's an incredible amount of diplomacy that's also part of being a good lawyer and advocate, to be able to do that. I can't imagine reversing all those policies strategically like you did in court, and then doing the right thing by meeting with them, but maintaining a good relationship. The first AG who was elected when Wallace was first elected in his really, in 63 or 4,
62,
62. Richmond Flowers, who Bill mentioned, he got into trouble for some other reasons, but on civil rights, he was a very progressive AG, and he was at loggerheads with Wallace the whole time. So you had that history to look back on, this, you know, to judge Wallace's reaction, and the fact that you were able to I'll give you credit as quite the diplomat and advocate to be able to pull that off the way you did.
well, thank you. That brings up another point I wanted to tell, too. The chief of the civil division when I came in was an older lawyer, my dad's age. He was a friend of my dad's named Gordon Madison. Gordon was from Tuscaloosa originally. He was in the state senate from Tuscaloosa. And Gordon Madison was, when I came in office, was by far, he was recognized as the best lawyer in the Attorney General's office. And he was the chief of the civil division. And he finished at the University of Virginia. In fact, James Madison and Dolly never had any children, but he was related to the Madison. He was related to the Madison family, and a great lawyer and a great man. But he was the chief of the division, so I told the chief assistant that I didn't want to go over there and dismiss those cases. I didn't go. But they sent Gordon Madison over to go, and he had to go dismiss them and read the list off and ask Judge Johnson to dismiss them and ask to change side, filed things asking to change sides. And so that afternoon, Mr. Madison came back and they told me that Mr. Madison wanted to see me. And I said, what does he want? He said he wouldn't say. We asked him what he wanted to see you about, and he said he had something he had to tell you personally.
Yeah, that's the first question the AG usually asks is, what do they want?
Yeah.
What do they want to talk about?
And I said, so what I thought, and I thought, man, I dodged a bullet yesterday with Wallace, but Mr. Madison's going to be so upset with me making him dismiss these cases. He's going to quit or retire, and they're going to say, this young attorney general has come in and run the very best lawyer in the office off. And I said, well, just tell him I'm busy and let him wait for a while. And so I hoped he'd get tired. He sat out there and sat out there and sat out there. I finally saw I was going to have to see him. And so I said, all right, tell him, come on in. So he came in and sat down. I thought I got by yesterday with Wallace, but here it comes. And so he said, General, I said, don't call me General, call me Bill. And he said, no, I'm going to call you General. He said, I wanted to come and look you, I know you're busy, but I wanted to look you in the eye, and I wanted to shake your hand. He grabbed my hand, and thank you for giving me the privilege, what you gave me this morning. This is the first time in many years I've been able to leave a federal courthouse and hold my head high, and I wanted to thank you for letting me do that. And that still kind of makes chill bumps come on me when I think about it. And but it also showed me sometimes that if you do the right thing, there are people out there that you might not even thought of that back you up on it. But that's one of my favorite stories about the whole time. But getting to this case, we got off on some wild goose chases. You're talking about the bombing case, right?
The bombing case, I think you should talk about the dynamics of that because of the
Okay.
witnesses and the challenges that you have. We've got about 20 or 30 minutes to go, Bill, but the part of what we talk about in class and is what's a critical function of law enforcement and being an AG or being a federal prosecutor for that matter is teamwork. You have to have very strong investigators. Mm-hmm. You have to have people you can trust on your team, on your staff, and you know, a lot of those people don't get as much credit as they should. I just noticed, you may have seen this, but Rob Langford recently passed away. He was an FBI agent who was really, if you look at who found the evidence and who kept digging in these cold cases, the Attorney General has limited investigative resources, but you depend on partners, and he recently passed away, but he should get a big share of the credit for all the hard work of not letting these cold cases just die, you know, when there were, when it could have been easy to, in those days, to just move on and let the time run out.
Okay, so you want me to hit kind of some highlights of how we got in that case?
Okay. The challenges that you faced to get the
All right.
conviction.
Well, when we started off, it was right around this same time, within days after we took office. I called in folks, told them we were going to work on that bombing case. And first thing we did was send over and get the files from the Public Safety Department, Highway Patrol, and ABI, Alabama Bureau of Investigation. And then we got Sheriff's Department from Jefferson County, copies of what they had, and copies of the Birmingham Police Department. And we started going through that, and it was, by and large, a waste of time. You're not going to believe it this day and age, but most of the manpower and hours on investigation at the local and state level was spent on this theory that the blacks had bombed the church themselves in order to get sympathy for their cause. And it's hard to believe that that was seriously investigated, but that was the theory that most of the effort was put on, was trying to, because some people believe that. I remember hearing it when I was a kid, a student. But the first real tip we had was on a guy from Georgia named J.B. Stoner. and he was a bad egg, bad. Most anti-Semitic person I believe had ever been in my lifetime, maybe in America, I mean. His outfit was called the National States' Rights Party, and it was out of Atlanta, the Atlanta area. But he and his group were in Birmingham the weekend of the bombing. And so we got this tip they did it. And they had done a bunch of bombings. They bombed the temple. They did a lot of Jewish temple bombings. They did the temple in Atlanta that they got charged with later. Charlotte, Jacksonville, Miami, Nashville, I believe. And they put one in Birmingham, but thank goodness it didn't go off. The custodian found it, and they got the police to dismantle it. But so we spent a year and a half maybe on him, and it wasn't. Finally, it was obvious he'd done a lot of bad things, he and his group, but they didn't bomb the church, the 16th Street Church. But we did find out where he and his group bombed Reverend Shuttlesworth's church. Have y'all ever heard of Reverend Shuttlesworth? He was the leader of the civil rights stuff in Birmingham, and in my opinion, he was the bravest of the brave. Out of all of them, he was the bravest of the brave. But we found out where his church had gotten bombed in 1957, and it was Stoner's group that did that bombing. But thank goodness there were no injuries or deaths there. And so the statute was 5 years if there's no injuries or death. But when we got to really looking at it, Shuttlesworth's church was in a residential neighborhood, and the wall of either side of the church was about 2 or 3 feet from the wall of the house on either side of it. And so some of my folks found in that statute that there was an exception that if you set off a bomb or explosive dangerously near an inhabited dwelling, there's no statute of limitations. And so everybody thinks that we indicted him and charged him and tried him and convicted him, which we did convict Stoner, for bombing Shuttlesworth's church, which was what happened. But we actually had to charge him and convict him of setting off a dangerous explosive near an occupied dwelling occupied by Mr. and Ms. So-and-so in such an address. So he got convicted of setting it off dangerously near those houses next to the church, and that's what. But that put Stoner and his group out of commission. Then we got a tip that the Klan in Montgomery had put the bomb. I should have had enough sense to know the Klan in Birmingham was plenty mean enough on their own. They didn't need any help from the Klan in Montgomery, but we spent time on that. But we solved a case there where the Klan in Montgomery had killed a young guy named Willie Edwards. His crime, quote, crime, had been he was driving a truck for Winn-Dixie, and they thought a black person shouldn't be in a high job like that. So his death had gone unsolved totally, and we finally got on the right track, but it took us 2 or 3 years. And when we did, we found out quickly that the FBI had been on their tail of the right ones, which is Chambliss and them, within minutes after the bomb went off. And we started where people were telling us, we told the FBI this, so we decided we needed to try to cooperate, get the FBI to cooperate with us. So I thought I'd had a good relationship with them, and we set it through channels trying to tell them we wanted to work with them on what they had on those on the Chambliss group, and I couldn't get an answer from them. And months passed, years passed, and I was patient because I knew at that time the FBI was justified in not just turning over stuff in their files to white Southern prosecutors or policemen or law enforcement or sheriff's people. And I thought they got to check me out, but I kept waiting and waiting and waiting, and like I say, it turned into years. I can't remember exactly when this was, but I remember Gerald Ford by then was president, and I was in Washington, and I had a good friend that his name was Jack Nelson. He was from Alabama, and Jack was a journalist, and he was the head and had been for a long time, he was older than me, of the Los Angeles Times.
Editor of law, yeah.
Yeah, he was the head of the LA Times Washington Bureau.
From Talladega.
Yeah, exactly, from Talladega County. And so I would go out to eat or go over to Jack's house when I was in Washington. He said, "You still working on that bombing case where the Klan killed those little girls?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "How you coming on it?" I said, "I'm afraid we're going to shut it down." I said, I don't think we can do anything with it. And I started explaining that we found out there was overlapping, and we just needed to get the FBI in it. And I couldn't get them I said, first thing, right soon after that, Hoover died, and I thought, well, with him gone, maybe it'll change, but nothing changed. They had all kind of interim directors, and none. He said, well, I might can help you with that. You want me to try to take a crack at getting them to work with you? I said, sure. So after a while, we got to talking about something else. I went on back to the hotel. Next morning, the phone rang. It was Jack. He said, "Baxley," said, "You've had your coffee yet?" I said, "Yeah, I had 3 cups already." He said, "Well, you still want me to try to help you with the FBI working with you on that case?" And I said, "Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're gone if you don't. Something doesn't happen." He said, "All right, I just wanted to make sure that you said the same thing after you had your coffee that you said after you had all those beers, and if you still want to do it, I'll see what I can do." So Jack told him that his bosses at the Times, I don't know whether it's true or not, were going to let him run a full-page expose every day for a week, front page, and he said, we want to submit it for Pulitzer, that the prosecutors in Alabama were on the verge of solving the bombing where the Klan bombed and killed those little girls, and the FBI and the Justice Department was blocking it. And the guy told Jack, said, "See if you can get them to hold off a little while." And so Jack called me and said, I think you're going to hear something good. So about just a very short time, 2 or 3 weeks, I got a call from the head of the FBI, and like I say, Gerald Ford was the president by then, and a guy named Levi was the U.S. Attorney General, and they called and said, the special agent in charge in Birmingham said, that bombing case you're working on, you've asked some help from us, that we're going to be able to work with you on that, just like it'd been a week ago, it had been years. And now, having said that, their definition of cooperation and mine are daylight and dark. What they meant by working with us, they told me I could send an investigator up to the FBI office in Birmingham, that we couldn't take anything out of there. But they'd give him an office and work with him on the case. So I got a new investigator in that hadn't been working on it. I mean, not a new, name was Bob Eddy. He at one time was sheriff of Madison County. Bob, still alive, a great guy, great investigator. And I told him to familiarize yourself with this case. We're going to assign all your other cases to the other folks. We're going to move you to Birmingham. The state will pay for you an apartment or a hotel, whatever you want. And you stay there till you go down to the FBI office and stay there till you solve this case. And so he went to Birmingham. They gave him a place to work. But what I didn't know, if he knew enough, they wouldn't let him just look through the files. if he knew enough to ask about somebody or something, they would go in and get it and bring it to him and let him make notes. They wouldn't let him copy anything. But if he didn't know to ask, they didn't show it to us. And so there were still things that popped up when Doug Jones, 20-something years later, tried those cases. Now, he didn't have that trouble because he was a U.S. attorney. But since the federal statute had expired long before, he had this is an interesting thing that very few people would understand. Judge Pryor was Attorney General at the time, and Judge Pryor had to make Doug Jones a Special Assistant Attorney General. And so Doug Jones was the incumbent U.S. Attorney, but he was made a Special Assistant Attorney General, and he went into the grand jury in Jefferson County and was charged under state law, and Doug prosecuted along with some people from Pryor's office and the DA's office in Jefferson County. But Doug tried it as a Special Assistant Attorney General of the state of Alabama and convicted the others. But there were people, some of those got, at least one of them, we could have tried when we convicted Chambliss if the FBI had shared with us what we knew. But it was, and one thing to me is my favorite part of the story. It bothered me that I knew there were people that were also guilty, just like Chambliss, and nothing was being done. And it was hard, but Doug was a student at Cumberland, and he cut class, and I think every minute of that trial, watched that trial from the balcony, and then later when he became U.S. Attorney, picked up on it, and he didn't have the trouble, like I say, that any of the state people would have had with the FBI, because he could make them behave. And
There's probably a reason why Bill was willing to let him take the case. Partly is a good law enforcement partnership.
You mean Bill Pryor?
Bill Pryor.
Yeah.
Bill Pryor was, because that would have been I know Bill feels very strongly about civil rights, and that would have been a case that
Bill Pryor, I am a fan of Luther Strange. I'm a fan of Bill Pryor, and I would recommend them to anybody for any kind of case or public duty or anything else. Let me tell one story about your teacher. I had a case where I needed him as a witness. He was my last witness, and the judge was a Democrat and African American, and it was a non-jury trial. And so Luther agreed to be my last witness. He was my last witness, and so when he finished, the judge said, "Well, I'm going to announce my ruling," but said, "General Strange, would you stay here a minute on the witness stand?" And Luther said, "Yeah." I said, "Sure, Judge. Sure, Your Honor." So he announced a very good verdict for us. And then he said, "Now, what I wanted to ask you about," said, "I'm a big basketball fan." And said, "When you were a senior in high school, y'all played in the state championship, and I watched it." And said, "That was one of the best games I've ever seen anybody play, is what you did, and y'all won." And said, "I want to ask if you remember doing so and 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 so."
We had a great time talking basketball.
And so he kept him there. The judge kept him there for 20 minutes probably, talking about his basketball career. And later asking him how he did at Tulane when he was playing for Tulane, and
I didn't know the judge was a big basketball fan, I swear.
I didn't either, but
You never
so,
know. Well, tell about the witness, the difficulty, the story, and I want to allow a minute or two for questions from our class. But the difficulty of getting an important witness to come back from Detroit to testify.
Okay,
Bill, that's one of the
okay.
most interesting. This is you got to have witnesses, you got to build your case, and this was an amazing situation.
a lot of things just, I feel like and then when Doug came in too, the same thing happened. There was a higher power looking after us on this in many ways, and this is one of them because it's just sheer luck on some of it. But this was one where we found it from the files. One of the few things we found from the files, but we located a witness, knew there was a witness named Miss Curtis Glenn. There was a black lady that was behind a church visiting some people that lived back there, and the night before the bombing, the night of the bombing was the next morning, about 2 a.m. in the morning, she was sitting on, it was a hot weekend in September, and she was sitting out there, they didn't have air conditioning, sitting on the porch, and she noticed a car come up in the alley in between her house and the back of the church. And when they opened the door, she noticed there was 4 white men in there. And 2 of them got out and looked like they were carrying a satchel and went around the corner of the church and stayed gone a while. And she knew something wasn't right because no white men at 2 a.m. in the morning should have been parked back there and going around by that church. So she wrote down the tag number of that car and a description of it. And it was Tommy Blanton's car, who was a co-defendant. And when she picked out pictures, she picked out Chambliss's picture as riding that was the only one she could identify, but he was riding in the passenger front seat. And when they showed a bunch of pictures of Klansmen, she picked him out and said, oh, it's him. So it took us a while to find out where she was from. She was from Detroit. And so I sent my investigators up there. And when they came back, they came in the office, and my chief investigator was Jack Showers. This is before I signed it to Eddie. And I said, well, what you got? He said, well, there's good news and bad news. What you want first? I said, I want the good news. I said, she is smart. She's a nice lady. Said she put out refreshments for us, and said she identifies Blanton's car, wrote down the tag number, identified Chambliss's picture, said she described the car. She still can pick out Chambliss's picture, says that she'll never forget that face. That's the only one she can identify. Said she's believable, she's smart, she would stand up well to cross. I said, well, what can be bad? She says she's not coming back to Alabama. Back then, we couldn't make witnesses from out of state testify, and now you can. Every state, all 50, have reciprocal subpoena power acts where they agree to recognize subpoenas of other jurisdictions, but we didn't have that then. In fact, when I was DA in Dothan, it borders Florida and Georgia, and we thank goodness had good cooperation, but you always had that problem. You couldn't make a witness come if they were out of state and they didn't want to. So I said, well, look, go up there and tell her so and so and so and so and so, and tell her how things are different. They said, we told her that. We told her. I said, no, you didn't tell her right. I wrote down what you go tell her that. So all right. So they went back up there. They came back and said, we told her, we'd already told her. We tried to tell you we'd already told her. We told her again, just like you'd written it out for us. and said, she says he's not coming back. And I said, if I got to do everything that's done in this office myself, so I'll go. So we called, set it up for us to go see her. I went up there with them and went over there, and sure enough, she was just like they said. She put those goodies out for us, and she said, Mr. Baxley, you seem like a nice man. Said, in fact, all these people you've sent up here have been nice men, but said, you've wasted your trip. I've tried to make it so plain to them, I'm not coming back to Alabama, and I'm not ever going to come back to Alabama. I'm not going to go anywhere near Alabama, and I'm sorry you've come up here. And so I was kind of going between despair and anger. And I got back up and went over there to where she had the goodies out and poured another cup of coffee or something. And I noticed she had a Jet magazine on that table. Y'all know what Jet magazine is? It's a black, back when I was young, it was probably the largest circulation black publication probably in the country. And it's still been published, but this was an anniversary edition of the Montgomery bus boycott that she had out. And so I opened it, and it came just open to a page that on one side was a picture of Rosa Parks and her lawyer, who was Fred Gray. And on the other side, the other page, was a picture of Dr. King and his lawyer, Fred Gray. And Fred Gray, by then, had been one of the first two blacks elected to the Alabama legislature. But he was a very good courtroom lawyer, and I had tried quite a few cases with Fred, and a couple against him. He's a top-flight lawyer, and we'd become good friends. And so it just opened to that page, and so I went over there and I said, Ms. Glenn, I noticed you got this thing here. I said, do you know Ms. Parks? She's from Detroit. She said, I've met Ms. Parks. I've had the privilege of meeting her. And I said, did you ever get to meet Dr. King? She said, no, I didn't get to meet Dr. King. And I said, well, you see this man here with them? And she said, yes. I said, if he were to come up here and tell you you need to come back to Alabama and testify in this trial, this is the man that Dr. King trusted with being his lawyer with the birth of the civil rights movement, and the man that Ms. Parks trusted to be her lawyer. I said, if this man were to come up here and tell you you need to come back, would you come back? And she said, well, I would certainly consider it. I said, let's get out of here, guys. Let's get out of here quick. So we got out, and back then they had pay phones on every few blocks in most cities. So I said, let's go to the first pay phone. So we stopped, and I called Fred, and thank goodness got him. Told him what was happening, asked him if I could send the state plane back down there. And that's something Governor Wallace, to his credit, let us have unlimited use of state planes and things like that in this whole investigation. But that's an aside. But Fred agreed he'd drop everything and come up there. So I called, we set it up, and next morning went over with Fred. And thank goodness Fred aged well, because when we got in there, first thing she did before she'd even almost let him talk, she got that magazine, opened it, that picture of Miss Parks and Dr. King and Fred, and held it up there against Fred's head, and looked at the magazine, looked at Fred, back and forth, back and forth. Finally she said, "It is you." And so Fred talked to her, and she agreed to come back. And she was one of the two main witnesses. We had to have these two. She and Chambliss's niece were the two main witnesses we had. But if it was just sheer higher power that I saw that magazine, it opened to that page. It made me think of Fred, and Fred came up and got her, because we never could have got her back.
What an unbelievable, I mean, there's so many stories, and I hate that we don't have any more time, because this is a piece of Alabama history that is, just amazingly important. And to hear from the person who pulled it together with skill, luck, hard work, determination, is something I think all of our
You got time for one more quick story about luck?
Yeah, absolutely. If the class doesn't object, that's
This, I don't want to give these boring stories, but when you mention luck, when we had the Chambliss trial, it came time for my final argument. It just happened that I was getting it right after lunch one day, and I was walking around downtown Birmingham. I still can't remember whether I ate or not, but probably if it did, it was a hot dog. But when I got back, John Young, who was one of my assistants that helped try the case, a great lawyer, great guy, spelled Y-U-N-G, John Young. He was up there getting the exhibits ready, and when I came back in the courtroom, he said, "Baxley, come here, I want to show you something." I said, "I'm getting my thoughts together, John." He said, "No, come here." I said, no, I'm thinking. He said, "Baxley, you stubborn goat, come in and look at this." So I went up there, and I had spread out, or was getting ready to spread out, all this stuff on the exhibits on the jury rail. They had a rail, it was wide enough where you could put papers and things on it in front of the jury. And so he handed me State Exhibit 1, and it was the death certificate for Denise McNair. And we indicted 4 separate crimes, and I was only trying it on Denise, thinking that if we found her not guilty, maybe somebody else would come along after me, and that might not be double jeopardy to try them on one of the other murders. It probably would have been double jeopardy, but I thought it was worth it, so I tried on. I only went against Denise, who was the 11-year-old, and so I said, "Oh, it's Denise's death certificate." "What?" He said, "Baxley, look at the date of birth." And so I looked, and that day was her birthday. She was born on that very day that my final argument was starting. So that gave me away. When I ended my argument, I said, told them, I spent about an hour, 20 minutes, something like that, arguing. And when I closed, I picked up that death certificate, and I said, "You're going to have all these exhibits. I hope you look at all of them. But I want you to look at Exhibit 1, because you're going to have an opportunity to do something that no other people in the world will ever have." And I said, "Look at the date of birth of Denise." And I said, I waved it in front of the jury. I said, I read it out. It was today. I said, "You people are going to have an opportunity to give her a birthday present, one that she will know and realize you're giving her." And so I said that it would be tonight, if it hadn't been for this man, and I pointed to Chambliss. I said, they might have been having cookies and birthday cake and ice cream over that house, but there'll never be a birthday celebration tonight. But you people can still celebrate her birthday in a better way than any candy or cookies or presents or songs could do. You can bring her killer to justice. And I saw 2 or 3 of the jurors, more than 2 or 3 of them, tear up during that part of it. And that's when first time I really kind of thought we might have a chance. But I was didn't know it, didn't see it, and didn't even know it when they were showing it to me. It was just sheer blind luck that John Young had noticed that and showed it to me. And that, who knows if they would have found him guilty or not without that.
Wow, what a story. We have a couple of minutes. If there are any questions from the class or anybody else who's has a question for Bill, be happy to do it. Yes, please.
Mr. Baxley, I was just going to ask, were the events surrounding the bombing, was that why you decided to run for Attorney General?
No, no. It was a lot of the reason I wanted to run for Attorney General was I wanted to do something about civil rights, different to make the state better, but I didn't single out and focus on that case, other than after the night before I was sworn in, when I put those names on that card. That was always in the back of my mind, but it wasn't just that case. It was all of it.
Kind of to follow up on that, can you explain being 28 and being elected Attorney General? Like, how did you feel, and what was the learning curve like?
How I feel about what?
How did you feel about being elected when you were 28, and what was the learning curve like?
Well, I didn't feel anything. I reckon I had probably tried more cases by then in the last 4 years than anybody in Alabama. I'd prosecute. I was an active prosecutor, and the Attorney General was sending me all over the state because they didn't have anybody to try cases. They sent me to Huntsville to try cases. I remember Andalusia. I thought, you know, if I'm going to be sent everywhere to try cases, I ought to be the man in charge. But,
So being DA was the preparation that really
Yeah.
turbocharged
Yeah.
your experience.
And Dothan was just the right size to be DA. If you're DA in a much larger circuit, you're not going to be able to try all the cases. And if you're much smaller circuit, you're not going to have that many to try. Dothan was just the right size to have case. I probably tried, 20 or 25, 30 cases of a year, jury trials. And
That's another advertisement for those who are interested in trial practice to look at DA's offices and prosecution offices. You do get a lot of experience, and it's invaluable. And you can be, they'll throw you right into it for sure.
When you're saying how I felt about being young, it was, I was through being Attorney General before Clinton got elected, so when I went to the meetings, there were two things that stood out. I was always by far the youngest people, and also Alabama was the only state, including the Northeast, Chicago, the West, we were the only state that when I would take assistants, some of them would be black. There were no other, any of the other states, never any black assistants other than the ones that were from our state. I felt good about that.
Well, Bill, you are a real pioneer, an outstanding lawyer and graduate of this law school, and one of my personal heroes. And I really appreciate you coming down here to take the time to share your experiences with this class and the school. And thanks to Professor Rosen there, I did not realize that the Law Review has published an account of a panel discussion that was held a few years ago. It's available for you, volume 71, number 3, 2020. But you were wise enough to record it, have it transcribed. It has Myron Thompson, who we talked about, Judge Keith Watkins, and some others who bring the story all together in their various roles about it. So that's a resource for you, too, that you have here at the law school. I'm going to give you that because I don't even think you've seen it.
Thank you, no.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Well, let's thank General Baxley for being here.
Thank y'all.